I'm Stella, and I'm 28 years old. At my own wedding reception, I watched my mother-in-law drop something into my champagne glass. She looked straight at me, smiled that fake smile I'd grown to hate over 3 years, and raised her own glass for a toast. I smiled back, discreetly switched our glasses while she spoke about happiness and family, and watched her drink what she'd meant for me. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like your in-laws were trying to poison your happiness. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and explain how I got to this point. Because trust me, this didn't happen overnight. 3 years ago, when I first met David's mother, Patricia Hoffman, I thought we'd eventually find common ground. I was young, hopeful, and completely naive about just how much some people can hate you without even knowing you. David and I had been dating for 6 months when he finally introduced me to his family at their annual 4th of July barbecue. I spent weeks preparing, buying the perfect dress, researching conversation topics about Patricia's garden club and charity work. I even practiced small talk in the mirror, determined to make the best possible first impression. The moment I walked into their pristine backyard in Westchester, Patricia's eyes swept over me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Not hostile exactly, just cold, dismissive, like I was temporary and she was simply waiting for me to realize it. "So you're the girl David's been mentioning," she said, not bothering to hide her disappointment. Her handshake was limp, her smile never reached her eyes, and she managed to make "girl" sound like an insult. David squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Mom, this is Stella Martinez. Stella, my mother." I tried my rehearsed greeting about how lovely their home was and how much I'd heard about her famous rose garden. Patricia nodded politely and immediately turned to discuss David's work promotion with his father. I spent the rest of the afternoon smiling and trying to join conversations that seemed to end whenever I approached. But the real warning sign came during dessert. David's sister Emma made a joke about wedding planning, teasing her brother about when he'd finally settle down. Patricia's fork paused midway to her mouth. "David has plenty of time to find the right person," she said, looking directly at me. "No need to rush into anything permanent." The table went quiet. David's face flushed red, but he didn't say anything. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be the warm family welcome I'd imagined. Still, I was determined to win her over. How hard could it be? Famous last words, right? Over the next year, I threw myself into earning Patricia's approval. I brought homemade cookies to family dinners, remembered everyone's birthdays, and volunteered for every holiday preparation. I complimented her cooking, asked for her advice, and genuinely tried to find things we had in common. Patricia accepted my efforts with the grace of someone receiving tribute from a conquered territory. Polite, but with an underlying message that nothing I did would ever be quite good enough. The comments started small, little observations about my job as an elementary school teacher. "Teaching must be so rewarding," she'd say with a pitying smile. Not financially, of course, but emotionally. Or she'd mention how David's previous girlfriend, some lawyer named Monica, had such impressive career prospects. Then came the subtle digs about my family. How interesting that my parents owned a small restaurant instead of working in professional fields. How unusual that I was the first in my family to finish college. How different our backgrounds were, spoken like she was discussing an unfortunate medical condition. But the real breaking point came during David's birthday dinner at an expensive steakhouse downtown. I'd saved for months to buy him a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, something I knew he'd love since he'd been talking about visiting wine country for years. When David opened the gift and his face lit up, I felt genuinely proud. Finally, something that proved I understood and cared about him. "How thoughtful," Patricia said, examining the hotel brochure. "Though I imagine you put this on a credit card? These boutique places are so expensive." My cheeks burned. She wasn't wrong. I had used a credit card, planning to pay it off over 3 months. But the way she said it, like I was being reckless with money I didn't have, made me feel small and irresponsible. "The experience is what matters," I managed to say. "Of course," she agreed, though David's used to finer things. His father and I took him to France last summer. The wine regions there are so much more sophisticated than anything domestic. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, Napa will be great. Stella knows I've wanted to go." "I'm sure it will be lovely." Patricia smiled that cold smile again. "It's sweet how hard she tries." Sweet how hard I tried, like I was a child playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. That night, David tried to reassure me that his mother just needed time to warm up. "She's protective," he explained. "She'll come around once she sees how good we are together." But Patricia had already made up her mind about me. And unfortunately, I was about to find out exactly what she really thought. The conversation that changed everything happened 6 months later, during David's cousin's wedding reception. I was in the bathroom when I heard Patricia's voice carrying from the hallway outside. "She's obviously after his money," Patricia was saying to someone, probably her sister Margaret. "Girls like that always are." From that background, working that little job, suddenly dating a man with David's prospects. Please. My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen in the bathroom stall, afraid to breathe. "But she seems to genuinely care about him," Margaret's voice responded. "Oh, she's smart about it. I'll give her that. All those sweet gestures, the thoughtful gifts she can't afford. It's textbook gold digger behavior. She's playing the long game, making him feel special and understood." David seems happy. David's naive. He sees a pretty face and a girl who pays attention to him, and he thinks it's love. She's targeting him because he's successful and stable. Mark my words, the moment she gets that ring, her true colors will show. I gripped the stall door so hard my knuckles went white. 3 years of trying to build a relationship with this woman, and she'd written me off as a gold digger before I'd even had a chance. But what hurt more was realizing that David's father Thomas and his sister Emma genuinely liked me. They included me in conversations, remembered things I'd told them, and seemed to enjoy having me around. It was only Patricia who treated me like an unwelcome intruder. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, I found David and smiled like nothing had happened. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't going to keep begging for approval from someone who'd already decided I was worthless. At the next family dinner, when Patricia made another comment about my modest background, I simply smiled and changed the subject. When she criticized the wine I'd brought, I thanked her for the feedback and moved on. I stopped trying to impress her and started focusing on the family members who actually appreciated me. The change in my behavior clearly frustrated Patricia. She'd grown accustomed to my eager attempts to please her, and my new calm indifference threw off her rhythm. She began making more pointed comments, trying to get a reaction. "I hope you're saving money for the future, Stella," she said during Christmas dinner. "Teaching salaries are so unpredictable." "I'm comfortable with my financial planning," I replied pleasantly, cutting my turkey. "Of course, but when you're thinking about marriage and children, expenses add up quickly. David's used to a certain lifestyle." David's fork clinked against his plate. "Mom, can we not discuss finances at Christmas dinner?" "I'm just being practical, sweetheart. Stella understands, don't you, dear?" I met her gaze steadily. "I understand that people have different definitions of what matters in life. David and I share the same values about what makes a relationship work." It was the closest I'd come to directly challenging her, and her eyes narrowed slightly. But David noticed the change too, and later that night, he made a decision that would set everything else in motion. Have you ever experienced a family member who just refused to accept you no matter what you did? Let me know in the comments below. 2 months later, David proposed. He did it perfectly, at sunset on the beach where we'd had our first official date, with the ring he'd designed himself based on conversations we'd had about vintage settings. I was so happy I cried, and for a moment, all thoughts of Patricia disappeared. But that evening, David sat me down with a serious expression. "I need to have a conversation with my mother about how she treats you," he said, holding my hands. "I've noticed the comments, the way she dismisses you. It's not okay, and it's going to change." I felt a mix of relief and dread. "David, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. We're getting married, which means you're going to be her daughter-in-law. She needs to respect you, and if she can't manage that, then she'll need to find somewhere else to spend holidays." The next day, David drove to his parents' house alone. He told me later that the conversation went exactly as badly as expected. "I laid it out clearly," David explained that night. "Either she starts treating you with respect, or she loses access to me. I told her I won't tolerate any more criticism, any more snide comments, any more attempts to make you feel unwelcome." How did she react? About how you'd expect. Tears, accusations that you've turned me against my family, threats to boycott the wedding. But I held firm. I told her that her behavior toward you reflects on who she is as a person, and it's ugly. I felt proud of David for standing up to her, but also nervous about what Patricia might do next. A woman who'd spent 3 years barely tolerating me wasn't going to suddenly become loving just because her son demanded it. I was right to be worried. The very next week, Patricia called me directly for the first time since we'd met. Her voice was honey-sweet, so different from her usual cold politeness. "Stella, darling, I owe you an apology. I've been thinking about what David said, and I realize I haven't been very welcoming. I'd love to help with the wedding planning, if you'd let me." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. Patricia Hoffman didn't apologize, and she certainly didn't volunteer to help with anything she couldn't control. "That's very kind of you," I said carefully. "David and I are still in the early planning stages." "Well, I have so much experience with events. I'd be happy to share some vendor recommendations, maybe help you avoid some common mistakes. Why don't we have lunch this week and discuss it?" I found myself agreeing, partly because refusing would seem petty to David, and partly because I was curious about what she was actually planning. But as I hung up the phone, one thought kept running through my mind. Patricia Hoffman had never done anything in her life that wasn't calculated. This sudden change of heart wasn't genuine kindness. It was strategy. The lunch meeting happened at Patricia's country club, because of course it did. She wanted the home field advantage, surrounded by women who would automatically defer to her judgment about wedding planning and family dynamics. Patricia looked perfect in her cream-colored suit and pearl earrings, every inch the sophisticated mother-in-law who definitely knew better than her son's young fiancé. She ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted, then launched into her helpful suggestions. "The grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel would be perfect for your reception," she said, consulting notes she'd already prepared. "How thoughtful. I know the event coordinator personally. We could get you a discount. Actually, David and I are looking at smaller venues. We want something intimate." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, but dear, with our family list, you'll need space for at least 200 people, unless you're planning to exclude relatives?" I realized this was a test. Agree to her preferences or be labeled as someone who cuts family out of important events. "We're planning a wedding, not a campaign fundraiser," I said pleasantly. "We want our actual close friends and family there, people who've been part of our story." "Well, of course you want to keep costs manageable," Patricia agreed, and I caught the subtle dig about money again. Though I hope David mentioned that weddings are an important social opportunity. His father's business associates will expect invitations. For the next hour, Patricia systematically tried to take over every aspect of our wedding planning. The venue was too small. The flowers I wanted were too seasonal. The menu wasn't sophisticated enough. The band I'd researched wasn't appropriate for a proper wedding. Each suggestion came wrapped in concern for David's happiness and our future together. But the message was clear. Left to my own devices, I would embarrass the family with my poor choices. "You know, Stella," Patricia said as we finished our salads, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work between us." "I appreciate that," I said, meaning none of it. "Good. Then you won't mind if I handle a few of the smaller details? The napkins, the centerpieces, maybe the guest book, just to take some pressure off you." And there it was. The real reason for this sudden change in attitude. Patricia wanted control over wedding details, probably so she could ensure everything met her standards and reflected well on the family. But also, I realized with growing unease, so she'd have access to wedding vendors, timelines, and logistics that I might not be monitoring closely. "That's very generous," I said slowly, "but David and I want to handle the important elements ourselves. Maybe you could help me choose between napkin colors?" Her eyes flashed with irritation before the smile returned. "Of course, whatever you think is best." But as we walked to our cars, Patricia's parting comment sent a chill down my spine. "I'm so looking forward to your special day, Stella. I want everything to be perfect for you and David. Absolutely everything." The emphasis she put on everything made it sound less like a promise and more like a threat. Over the next few months, I tried to include Patricia in small wedding decisions while keeping control of the big ones. It was like diplomatic negotiation with someone who smiled while planning your destruction. "What do you think of these napkin colors?" I'd ask, showing her samples. "The ivory is classic," she'd respond, "though the blush pink might complement the floral arrangements better. What type of centerpieces are you planning?" I learned to deflect her attempts to gather information about our timeline, vendors, and logistics. When she offered to pick up our wedding favors, I told her we'd decided to make them ourselves. When she suggested she could coordinate with the florist, I mentioned that David and I wanted to handle all vendor communications directly. Patricia's frustration with my boundaries grew more obvious as the wedding approached. She'd make suggestions that sounded helpful, but were actually attempts to insert herself into our plans. "You know, dear, if you give me your caterer's number, I could confirm the final headcount for you. Save you one phone call." "Thanks, but I enjoy talking with Maria about the menu. She's been so creative with our ideas." "Well, if you change your mind, I just want everything to go smoothly for you both." The thing about Patricia was that her manipulation was sophisticated. She never directly challenged my decisions or made obvious power grabs. Instead, she positioned herself as the experienced family member who could help the young bride avoid mistakes. But I caught her in small lies that revealed her real agenda. She'd mention vendor names she claimed to recommend. Then I'd discover she'd already called them to discuss her son's wedding before talking to me. She'd offer to handle communications with the church. Then I'd find out she'd tried to change details about our ceremony timeline. Each incident was minor enough that confronting her would make me seem paranoid or controlling. But together, they painted a clear picture of someone working to undermine my wedding planning while maintaining plausible deniability. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the wedding. Patricia called to inform me that she'd taken the liberty of ordering additional floral arrangements for the ceremony. "I noticed you didn't have flowers for the altar," she explained, her voice dripping false concern. "I couldn't bear the thought of photographs looking sparse." "We specifically chose minimal decorations for the altar," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "The venue's architecture speaks for itself." "Oh, but Stella, you want David to have beautiful wedding photos to remember this day. Trust me, you'll thank me later." "Patricia, I need you to cancel that order. We've already finalized our floral design with the florist." Silence stretched between us. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her, "I suppose you know best about these things." That night, I told David about his mother's latest intervention. He was furious and called her immediately to set another firm boundary. But I was beginning to realize that boundaries didn't matter to Patricia. She'd simply find new ways to insert herself into our wedding. And she was running out of time to make whatever statement she was planning to make. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts about what was coming. But I was so focused on protecting our wedding from her interference that I didn't see the real danger until it was almost too late. The week before our wedding, Patricia's behavior shifted again. The pushy helpfulness disappeared, replaced by an almost serene satisfaction that made my skin crawl. She stopped calling with suggestions and stopped trying to insert herself into our final preparations. "Your mother seems calmer lately," I mentioned to David as we confirmed last-minute details with our vendors. "Maybe she's finally accepted that the wedding is happening with or without her approval," he said, sounding relieved. But I knew Patricia better than that by now. She didn't accept defeat. She just changed tactics. Her sudden peace felt like the quiet before a storm. At our rehearsal dinner, Patricia played the role of gracious mother of the groom perfectly. She complimented my dress, chatted warmly with my parents, and gave a beautiful speech about how happy she was to welcome me into the family. Watching her perform, I felt like I was seeing a master manipulator in action. Every gesture was calculated, every word chosen for maximum effect. She hugged me in front of the cameras, called me daughter, and expressed such convincing joy that even I almost believed her transformation was real. Almost. "She's really come around," my mother whispered to me during dinner. "I think she just needed time to see how much you and David love each other." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was screaming. My mother saw a woman who'd found peace with her son's choice. I saw someone who'd found a different way to get what she wanted. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined disasters Patricia might have planned. Would she object during the ceremony? Stand up and tell the congregation why I wasn't good enough for her son? Had she sabotaged our catering? Our flowers? Our music? David found me at 3 a.m. standing by our hotel window, staring out at the city lights. "Hey, what's wrong? Cold feet?" "Your mother is planning something," I said without turning around. "I can feel it. Stella, she was perfect tonight. She even told my dad how beautiful you looked and how proud she was of me for choosing you. That's exactly why I'm worried. Patricia Hoffman doesn't change her mind about fundamental things. She's been planning something for months, and now she's confident enough to be nice because she knows it doesn't matter anymore." David wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Even if she tries something tomorrow, it won't matter. We'll be married regardless. Nothing she says or does can change that." He was right about the marriage part, but what I didn't realize was that Patricia wasn't planning to stop our wedding. She was planning to make sure I never got to enjoy it. What do you think will happen next? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. Our wedding day dawned perfect and clear, the kind of September morning that makes you believe in good omens. As I got ready with my bridesmaids, surrounded by champagne and laughter and all the joy a bride should feel, I almost convinced myself that my fears about Patricia had been paranoia. The ceremony was everything David and I had dreamed of. Intimate, meaningful, filled with people who actually loved us. When Patricia dabbed at her eyes during our vows, I thought maybe, just maybe, seeing David so happy had finally softened her heart toward me. The reception started beautifully. Our first dance as husband and wife felt like floating, and when David spun me slowly around the dance floor, I felt drunk on happiness and possibility. That's when I saw it. As David turned me in a graceful spin, I caught sight of our gift table where Patricia stood with her back to the dance floor. She was holding my champagne glass, the crystal flute I'd left there when we went to dance, and she was dropping something into it from a small vial. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled slightly, and David steadied me with concern. "You okay, babe?" "Fine," I managed, my voice sounding normal even as my mind raced. "Just dizzy from the spinning." David laughed and pulled me closer as the song continued. Over his shoulder, I watched Patricia cap the vial and slip it into her purse. Then she picked up both champagne glasses, mine and her own, and arranged them carefully on the table. When the dance ended, Patricia appeared at our side with those bright smiles and both glasses in her hands. "You two looked so beautiful out there," she said, handing us the flutes. "I thought this would be the perfect time for a mother's toast to the happy couple." She kept talking, saying something about how happy she was to see David so in love, how excited she was to have me as a daughter, how she wished us a lifetime of happiness together. Standard mother-in-law wedding speech material, delivered with award-worthy sincerity. But I wasn't listening to her words. I was watching her eyes, which remained cold even as her voice grew warm with emotion. And I was thinking fast because in about 30 seconds she was going to expect us to drink from those glasses. "To Stella and David," Patricia concluded, raising her glass high. "May your marriage be everything you both deserve." The emphasis on deserve sent another chill through me. I raised my glass with a smile. David raised his, and every wedding guest in the room prepared to celebrate with us. But in the split second before Patricia brought her glass to her lips, I made a decision that would change everything. "Wait," I said sweetly. "Before we drink, I want to switch glasses with you, Patricia. In my family, it's traditional for the bride to drink from the mother-in-law's glass for good luck in the marriage." I held my breath, watching Patricia's face carefully. For just a moment, her composure cracked. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and her grip on her glass tightened. "Oh, that's not necessary," she began. "I insist," I said firmly, already reaching for her glass. "It would mean so much to me to honor that tradition on our wedding day." Patricia had no choice but to comply without making a scene in front of 60 wedding guests. We swapped glasses with warm smiles, and I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. "To the happy couple," Patricia said again, her voice slightly strained. We all raised our glasses. We all drank. And then we waited. The effect started about 15 minutes later, just as David and I were cutting our cake. I noticed Patricia swaying slightly as she stood near the gift table, her hand gripping the edge for support. At first, I thought she might just be feeling emotional. Weddings can be overwhelming, and she'd been putting on quite a performance all day. But then her face went pale, and she pressed her hand to her throat with a confused expression. "Mom?" David called out, immediately moving toward her. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Patricia managed, but her voice sounded strained. "Just need some air." But she wasn't fine. As David reached her side, Patricia's legs gave out completely. She collapsed to the ground, her body convulsing in terrifying spasms. The wedding reception erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests rushed forward or backed away. David dropped to his knees beside his mother, shouting her name. "Call 911, someone yelled. "Is there a doctor here?" another voice demanded. I stood frozen by our wedding cake, watching the scene unfold with a calm that probably looked like shock to everyone else. But inside, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Patricia had finally gotten exactly what she'd planned to give me. By some miracle, an ambulance was already in the neighborhood responding to another call. The paramedics arrived within minutes, working quickly to stabilize Patricia while David held her hand and begged her to stay conscious. "What did she eat?" one of the paramedics asked rapidly. "Any allergies we should know about?" "She just had champagne," David said, his voice breaking with panic. "And dinner, same as everyone else." That's when I made my decision. Standing there watching my husband's terror, seeing his mother fighting for her life on our wedding day, I realized I couldn't let her die without the truth coming out. "She put something in my drink," I said quietly to the paramedic closer to me. "What?" The paramedic looked up sharply. "She put something in my champagne glass," I repeated, louder now so David could hear. "I saw her do it during our dance. We switched glasses before the toast." The silence that followed was deafening. David's head snapped up to stare at me, his face cycling through confusion, denial, and growing horror as the implications sank in. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Check her purse," I said simply. She had a small vial. One of the paramedics immediately began searching through Patricia's purse while the other continued working to stabilize her vitals. Within seconds, he found what we were looking for, a small glass vial with traces of clear liquid inside. David stood slowly, the vial in his hand, staring at it like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "She tried to poison you," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "On our wedding day. She tried to poison my wife." The paramedic took the vial carefully. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately. This will help the doctors determine the antidote." As they loaded Patricia onto a stretcher, her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. She looked directly at me, and I saw recognition there. She knew exactly what had happened and who was responsible for her current condition. I smiled at her, just a small private smile that no one else could see. Then I took my husband's hand and followed the ambulance to the hospital, still in my wedding dress, to see if my mother-in-law would survive her own murder attempt. The emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital was nothing like how I'd imagined spending my wedding night. I sat in a plastic chair still wearing my white silk gown and veil, holding David's hand while he stared at the floor in shocked silence. The doctors worked quickly once they identified the substance in Patricia's system. Apparently, she'd chosen something sophisticated, not your typical household cleaner or rat poison, but a concentrated plant extract that would have caused organ failure within hours if consumed in sufficient quantity. "Your mother-in-law is very lucky," Dr. Richards told us after what felt like an eternity. "The dose she ingested was significant, but because you identified the source so quickly, we were able to administer the appropriate treatment. She should make a full recovery." David's shoulders sagged with relief. I felt nothing but mild disappointment that Patricia's plan had failed so completely. "Can we see her?" David asked. "She's sedated right now, but she should be conscious tomorrow. I have to warn you, there may be some temporary memory issues as her body processes the toxin." After the doctor left, David turned to me with haunted eyes. "Stella, I'm so sorry. If you hadn't noticed what she did, if you hadn't switched those glasses—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "But I did notice," I said gently. "And I'm fine. We're both fine." "How did you know to switch them?" I considered how much truth to share. David was already devastated by his mother's betrayal. Did he need to know that I'd been expecting something like this for months? "I saw her put something in my glass during our dance," I said. "I didn't have time to think about it, just reacted." It wasn't technically a lie. I had seen her tamper with my drink, and I had reacted quickly. I just left out the part where none of this surprised me. "She tried to murder you," David said again, like he was trying to make the words make sense. "My mother tried to murder my wife on our wedding day." "Yes, she did." "How long has she been planning this? Has she been planning this since we got engaged? Since we started dating?" Those were questions I couldn't answer without revealing how much I'd suspected about Patricia's true feelings toward me. Instead, I squeezed his hand and said what he needed to hear. "David, this isn't your fault. You couldn't have known she was capable of something like this." But even as I comforted my husband, I was already thinking about what would happen next. Patricia would survive, which meant she'd eventually be able to tell her version of events. She might claim it was an accident, or that I'd framed her somehow, or that she'd been having some kind of mental breakdown. The police arrived around midnight to take our statements and collect evidence. Officer Martinez was professional but thorough, asking detailed questions about our relationship with Patricia and the events leading up to the poisoning. "Has Mrs. Hoffman ever made threats against you, Mrs. Hoffman?" she asked. "Not directly," I answered carefully, "but she's made it clear that she disapproved of our relationship and thought I was wrong for her son." David provided additional context about his mother's behavior and the conversation he'd had with her after our engagement. The officer took notes and assured us that charges would be filed once Patricia was stable enough to be formally arrested. As we finally drove home in the early hours of the morning, still in our wedding clothes, David asked the question I'd been dreading. "What happens now? How do we move forward from this?" I looked at him, my husband of less than 24 hours, whose mother had just tried to murder me, and realized that our marriage was either going to be stronger than anything Patricia could throw at us, or it was going to collapse under the weight of this betrayal. Either way, Patricia Hoffman would never have the power to hurt me again. Patricia spent 4 days in the ICU before being moved to a regular hospital room. During that time, David barely left the hospital, torn between relief that his mother was alive and horror at what she'd tried to do to me. I brought him coffee and sandwiches, sat with him during the long hours of waiting, and watched him process the complete destruction of his relationship with the woman who'd raised him. "I keep thinking about all the times she criticized you," he said during one of those long nights. "All the comments about your background, your job, your family. I thought she was just being snobby. I never imagined she actually hated you enough to try to kill me on our wedding day," I finished. "Yeah, that was a surprise." David looked at me sharply. "How are you so calm about this? She tried to murder you, Stella. You should be traumatized or angry or something? I was angry, but not traumatized, and certainly not surprised. If anything, I felt vindicated. For 3 years, I'd sensed that Patricia's dislike of me went deeper than normal in-law disapproval, and I'd been right. I'm processing it differently than you are, I said instead. She's your mother. For me, she's just someone who revealed exactly who she really is. When Patricia was finally alert enough for visitors, David insisted we go see her together. I wasn't particularly interested in a bedside reconciliation, but I wanted to look her in the eye and see how she planned to explain herself. Patricia looked small and fragile in her hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IV lines. The confident, commanding woman who'd terrorized me for years seemed diminished by her own medicine. "David," she whispered when we entered the room. Her voice was hoarse from the intubation. "I'm so sorry you had to see me like this." Notice she apologized for him having to see her sick, not for trying to murder his wife. "Mom, what did you do?" David's voice broke on the question. "They found the vial in your purse. The doctors confirmed you poisoned yourself by accident when Stella switched your glasses." Patricia's eyes flicked to me, and I saw a flash of the old hatred before she arranged her features into a mask of confusion. "I don't remember," she said weakly. "Everything from that day is foggy. I remember the ceremony and dancing, and then nothing until I woke up here." "You don't remember putting something in my champagne glass?" I asked pleasantly. "What? No, I would never. Why would I do something like that?" She looked between David and me with perfectly crafted bewilderment. "Are you suggesting I tried to hurt you deliberately?" The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen her tamper with my drink with my own eyes, I might have believed her myself. But David had spent 4 days thinking about this, and he wasn't buying her act. "Mom, they found plant extract in your system, concentrated oleander specifically. That's not something you accidentally ingest. Where did you get it?" Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The police are going to investigate," David continued relentlessly. "They're going to search your house, check your computer, trace your purchases. If you planned this, they're going to find out." For a moment, Patricia looked like she was going to continue the charade. Then something in her expression shifted, and I saw the woman I'd always known her to be underneath the mask. "Fine," she said, her voice stronger now. "You want the truth? I did it for you, David. She's not right for our family. I tried to make you see it, but she had you completely fooled." The raw honesty was almost refreshing after years of passive-aggressive manipulation. "So you decided to murder her?" David asked incredulously. "I decided to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life," Patricia snapped, finally dropping all pretense of remorse. "Girls like her don't love men like you. They love what you can provide them." I laughed, actually laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. "Even now," I said, "after poisoning yourself by accident trying to kill me, you still think I'm the problem." Patricia glared at me with pure hatred. "You've destroyed my family." "No," David said firmly, standing up from his chair. "You destroyed our family the moment you put poison in my wife's drink. And you know what, Mom? You succeeded in one thing. You showed me exactly who you really are." He took my hand and headed toward the door. "David, please don't leave like this," Patricia called after him, desperation creeping into her voice. "I'm not leaving like this," David said without turning around. "I'm leaving forever." The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. Patricia was charged with attempted murder, and despite her lawyer's attempts to claim temporary insanity, the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution found her internet search history, which included extensive research about plant toxins and their effects. They traced her purchase of gardening supplies that could be used to extract oleander concentrate. Most damaging of all, they discovered she'd been planning this for months. Patricia accepted a plea deal rather than go to trial. 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. Not as much as attempted murder typically carried, but enough to ensure she'd have plenty of time to think about her choices. David struggled with his decision to cut off all contact with his mother, but ultimately, he couldn't forgive her attempt to murder me. His father Thomas and sister Emma supported his choice, both horrified by Patricia's actions. "I keep thinking I should visit her," David told me one evening, 6 months after the sentencing. "She's still my mother. She tried to kill your wife," I reminded him gently. "Whatever relationship you had with her ended the moment she put poison in my drink." "I know. It's just hard to reconcile the woman who raised me with the person who did this." "The woman who raised you was always the person who did this," I said. "You just didn't see that side of her because it wasn't directed at you." David nodded slowly. He'd been going to therapy to process the betrayal and was making progress, but some wounds take time to heal. As for me, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more walking on eggshells around Patricia's criticism. No more dreading family gatherings. No more pretending that her behavior was normal or acceptable. The rest of David's family rallied around us beautifully. Thomas offered his sincere apologies for not recognizing Patricia's behavior as dangerous. Emma became one of my closest friends. Even the extended family members who had previously deferred to Patricia's judgment about me now went out of their way to show their support. 6 months after our dramatic wedding day, David and I took a proper honeymoon to Italy. As we sat on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, sharing wine and watching the sunset, David raised his glass in a toast. "To surviving our wedding day," he said with a rueful smile. "To surviving your mother," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't seen her put the poison in your drink?" David asked. I considered the question. If I'd drunk from that glass, I would have died in agony in front of our wedding guests, on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. Patricia would have comforted her grieving son, probably suggesting that my death was some kind of tragic accident or divine judgment. "I try not to think about it," I said instead. "What matters is that her plan failed, and we're here together." "I'm so sorry it took me so long to see who she really was," David said. "Not for the first time." "You saw what you needed to see when it mattered," I replied. "That's all that counts." And it was true. David had chosen me over his mother when the stakes couldn't have been higher. Patricia had gambled everything on her hatred and lost spectacularly. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well. Though I have to admit, watching your would-be murderer accidentally poison herself because she underestimated your intelligence comes in a very close second. 3 years later, David and I are happily married with a beautiful daughter named Grace. Patricia sends letters from prison that we return unopened. She's missed her son's promotion to partner, our first wedding anniversary, the birth of her granddaughter, and countless family milestones that she'll never be part of. And honestly, our family is better without her. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of justice served and toxic family members getting exactly what they deserve.